everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I will be cleaning and possibly upgrading, depending on how this video plays out, this 13-inch mid-2013 MacBook Air. Let's get started. This MacBook features a 1.3 GHz dual-core Intel Core i5 processor, 4 GB of DDR3 memory running at 1600 MHz, along with Intel HD Graphics 5000. It's pretty basic as far as MacBooks go. So much like all my other videos, there isn't a plan for this one. What we're going to do is we're going to start by cleaning off the exterior and we're going to blow the dust out of the interior of this MacBook Air just to get things clean and tidy before I begin installing new components and upgrading system software. To begin the process, I shut down the MacBook. Next, I took a microfiber cloth and sprayed some isopropyl alcohol on it to clean off the keyboard and the palm rest. While cleaning off the keyboard, I did my best to not press the power button, but it's kind of impossible to avoid that. Oopsies. After shutting the MacBook down again, I proceeded to wipe off the display and get it looking good as new. While it wasn't very dirty to begin with, it looks a whole lot nicer now. I gave the top and bottom of the MacBook a good cleaning and prepared to unscrew and detach the bottom plate. I then unscrewed the 10 P5 pentalobe screws from the bottom of the MacBook Air. It is worth noting that the final 2 screws I removed are longer than the other 8. After all the screws had been removed, I could remove the bottom plate. And voila! Remember how I said that Apple makes things look good on the inside of their computers? Well, this is what I meant. Now to get rid of all the dust. Before we do that, I'll show you the inside of this computer. Right here we have the fan. It's pretty self-explanatory. Over here is the CPU attached to the woefully inadequate heatsink. No wonder this thing melts your thighs. This is the SSD. Over here is the airport wireless card responsible for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc. Right here's the video connector for the display, and finally this big black thing is the battery. Grabbing an anti-static brush and a can filled with air, wow, impressive, right? I de-dusted the internals of the MacBook. This didn't take too long as there really wasn't too much dust, which is nice. Believe me when I say, I've seen a lot worse. After swapping the SSD for a spare one that I had lying around, yes, it took me all of 60 seconds to swap the SSD after I had the thing opened up, I installed macOS. Interestingly, it installed Mountain Lion. I then proceeded to install macOS Mojave just so I could have the option to upgrade to Big Sur. This took about 3 hours, which was super awesome. Not. Before fixing up this MacBook, meaning redoing the thermal paste as well as installing the new SSD, which should arrive in a few days, I decided to run some tests. First up was Cinebench R23. After launching the app and getting past Apple's handy yet wildly annoying third-party software installation security messages, I ran the Cinebench CPU render test. Chugging away at this task is the Intel Core i5 model 4250U. This Haswell-based processor features 2 cores, 4 threads, 3 MB of level 3 cache, and a turbo boost speed of just 2.6 GHz. It also doubles as a furnace! This thing gets so hot that it brings me physical discomfort using it on my lap for prolonged periods of time. The CPU idles at a steady 62 degrees Celsius and maxes out at a water-boiling 100 degrees Celsius before thermal throttling takes place. At that point, the fan is also running at full tilt and making a distracting amount of noise. Needless to say, a thermal paste reapplication will probably be necessary. Thermals aside, this CPU takes about 10 minutes to complete the Cinebench test and scores 1403 points, during which the battery drains only 3%. I think that's actually pretty respectable for a laptop of this age. The next test was Geekbench 5. This didn't take as long as Cinebench and the CPU didn't get nearly as hot, peaking at around 78 degrees Celsius. The test took about 5 minutes and delivered a multi-core score of 1287 and a single-core score of only 636. To put that in perspective, the CPU in this MacBook is about as powerful as the quad-core A10 Fusion chip found in the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus. Okay, I'm done with benchmarks, let's try some real-world tests. Now to answer the age-old question, can it edit 4K video? Now given that this MacBook runs macOS Big Sur, it can run the latest version of Final Cut Pro, so I got curious. Despite this laptop being 8 years old, I was shocked to see that yes, it can handle a 4K timeline in Final Cut. Well, it sort of can. It's doable, it's just not practical. Running Final Cut Pro on a dual-core processor, 4GB of RAM, and a fairly weak integrated graphics processor is actually not as awful as it sounds. Absolutely, you are guaranteed to drop frames while playing back 4K video, and it does take a while to render anything, but provided that you're not editing HEVC video, it's still viewable and you can actually see what you're editing without having to wait too long for the computer to catch up with you, which is great. To achieve better performance, you can always transcode the footage to ProRes codec, which makes scrubbing through the timeline a lot smoother. To sum this up, if you really need to get 4K video editing done on the go and you're limited to a 2013 MacBook Air, you're going to be fine. Of course, it's not going to be the fastest thing in the world, but if you transcode your media first and dial back your playback quality settings, it's surprisingly smooth, and you most likely won't run into too many issues. Just a warning though, if you plan on doing voiceover with the built-in microphone, I can't guarantee that you won't hear the system fan running in the background. Also, the microphone is kind of, well, awful. I spent about 17 minutes in total editing this short video on the MacBook Air, but most of that was waiting for it to render things. I added titles, transitions, and color grading, and it handled it fine, although the fan was almost constantly running in jet engine mode. Exporting this 1 minute 12-second clip was an entirely different story. Sure, it took a bit of time to start the export, but once it got going, it only took this MacBook about a minute and a half to finalize this 4K video and export the finished copy to the desktop. Needless to say, I was impressed. So, the SSD finally arrived. Much like the one featured in my previous video, this lovely stick of storage is an OWC Aura Pro X2 PCI Express NVMe SSD designed for all Mac computers that use Apple's annoying proprietary SSD slot. First, I needed to shut down the MacBook. Yes, my password for my testing SSD legitimately is the word pretzel, if you were trying to figure out my password from which keys I was pressing. The next step was to remove my testing SSD and install the new one in hopes of installing macOS onto it before I try to transfer over the user's existing files. Don't ask me why I didn't try to back up the user's files beforehand. Sometimes I do things which I later observe while editing videos that make me question what on earth was I thinking. After failing to try and install macOS, yes, the SSD clearly labeled requires macOS High Sierra or later, shockingly enough, won't work when the only recovery partition you have access to is the one for OS X Mountain Lion from 2012. Turns out the secret is to boot into the latest version of Internet Recovery by holding Option-Command-R at startup. I didn't know that yet at the time I recorded this part of the video. Well, initially my objective for this was to format the drive as APFS. Turns out I can't do that because it decided to install Mountain Lion. So that's a problem because the disk is not recognized because it's an NVMe drive that is from a third party. You have to install High Sierra or later. I don't have High Sierra installed on here right now, and for whatever reason, whenever I try to boot into recovery mode, it decides to boot me into macOS Mountain Lion, so that's just fantastic. In the meantime, I threw in the original SSD and made a backup of everything. Next, I spent about 45 minutes trying to devise a plan in order to get around the recovery mode fiasco, with no luck. After searching Google for longer than I care to admit, I figured out how to get around it. The first thing I tried was to boot off the recovery partition on my Hackintosh's USB Kickstart drive. I'll explain in a different video. This didn't work at all, as you can probably tell, and it managed to, well, permanently enable verbose mode throughout the entire recovery process. I ended up fixing this by purging the NVRAM after reinstalling macOS. After finally figuring out the whole Option-Command-R thing, I managed to get the MacBook to boot into macOS Big Sur recovery, and we all lived happily ever after. Just kidding. Installing macOS Big Sur took a long time, but it eventually worked, and then I transferred the owner's files back onto their beloved MacBook Air. So that concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, then I don't care. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.